The new ColorTone Diffuser in DaVinci Resolve 20.1 is a peculiar tool. That's why I waited to get my hands on the new features guide in order to find out exactly what it is. Hey guys, I'm Danny, your friendly neighborhood colorist, and the ColorTone Diffuser is a new effect that you can apply to mimic a diffusion filter on your lens. And this is interesting because it's a new way that you can add this sort of soft diffusion effect other than the bloom or the glow in Resolve. Before we apply the ColorTone Diffuser, we must determine what category or which section does this effect sit in. By logic, since this effect is trying to bloom our highlights, I would categorize it as a finishing effect. And if that's the case, I will be putting it in my FX node in my finishing effects category here. Side note, if you're interested to know more about this node tree that I'm using, you can watch this video. It's my commercial power grade that I use for most of my commercial and film work. To apply the ColorTone Diffuser effect, simply go into your effects palette on your top right and scroll down to Film Emulation and go into ColorTone Diffuser. Just drag it into your FX node. And when you drag in effects, instantly you will see a difference in your grade, which is if I turn this node off, the highlights will be suppressed. And this is because of a few different reasons. Firstly, let's skip over the presets and go into the color space override. Right now, my input color space and input gamma is set to use timeline by default. If I go into my project settings, you will see that my timeline color space is set to DaVinci White Gamut. But since this FX node itself is not sitting in a DaVinci White Gamut color space, so everything that's DaVinci White Gamut in this node tree is over here. And in my ODT, I'm going from DaVinci White Gamut to Rec 9 Gamma 2.4. So the FX node is sitting in Rec 9. Hence, in the color space overrides, I must switch this to Rec 9 and Gamma 2.4. Now, if I turn this node on and off, you can see in the color display that the compression is a lot less. But there is still a slight compression in the highlights, if you notice in the waveform as well. And this is coming from the image adjustments here. If I simply turn off this enable adjustment checkbox, the effect will be removed completely. So now if I turn this node on and off, there will be no changes in my viewer. With these adjustments turned off, you get an actual clean slate instead of the clean slate preset that you find up here, which includes the compression of your highlights. So make sure that you turn this off if you don't want any tonal adjustments made to your grade. We'll talk a little bit about the preset options later on. Let's head into the diffusion section first. So in the diffusion section, this is where you find the diffusion filter. The resolution slider here is to mimic a loss of resolution when you apply a diffusion filter, such as if I go down from 1, you see the image getting more blurry. And I believe this effect is carried over from the lens blur OFX. But if you don't want to drop your detail or resolution, you can go straight into the diffusion checkbox and check it. So if you look at the new features guide, the diffusion effect spreads the bright areas out, diffusing into nearby parts of the frame, which is a pretty straightforward definition for a diffusion filter. So if I increase the amount, the diffusion will grow larger, and if I increase the radius, it will spread further. And this is very nice because it sort of mimics how it looks like in camera. If I turn it on and off, it only affects the brighter areas, such as this Coca-Cola sign here, has very little effect or even no effect to it. Only the brighter parts of this image will have that diffusion. And I believe this is something that happens organically as well. That's why it looks so natural. Moving on to the soft clip and the highlight soft clip. By the definition in the new features guide, the shadow soft clip protects the shadows from being affected by the color tone diffuser. But if I enable my shadow clip, you will notice something, which is in my blacks. Notice this shadow here. There will be a very hard clip off or cut off in my shadows. So what I was expecting is for the diffusion to not affect the shadow or even the highlight. Instead, the effect that I get is a compression in the shadow and the highlight. So switching over to this grayscale ramp, we can clearly see what this shadow soft clip and highlight soft clip is actually doing. If I turn on my shadow clip, you will notice if I move the threshold up, it will create this sort of clip off or cut off in the shadow, and you can adjust for the softness of this cutoff. So if I go all down to 0, it will be a very hard cutoff. If I go to 0.5, then it will be a smooth curve. Same goes for the highlights. If I reduce the threshold, it will create this cutoff point. If I reduce the softness all down to 0, you can very clearly see that it's reducing your highlight levels in a very harsh way. Of course, you can adjust for the roll off, but the highlight point itself is being dragged very aggressively in my opinion. So I wouldn't really use the shadow clip and highlight clip because in my opinion, there are other tools that will create a nicer roll off in the shadow, such as in your custom curve, you can use the editable splines. But later on, when we go into the different presets, you might understand why these two settings are here, along with another confusing tool, which is the tone lights. Going back into the new features guide, the tone lights are defined to control the hue of the ring lights that is scattered off the diffusive elements in the filter. But let me show you how you can use it. So going back to the clip that we have here, and let's go into our ColorTone diffuser node. In the tone lights, you can increase the intensity of this tonal light and it will sort of fade your whole image. So the adjustment that you have to do will be in the image adjustment by enabling the adjustment and reducing the temperature or increasing the contrast. So it gets the whole image back to where it was before. And we have to make these adjustments so that we can use this tone light bias. The bias red, green, and blue is defined by the relative amount of certain color in a tone light. These controls are content dependent and more visible in the shadows. So let's say if I increase my bias red, you'll notice in the shadow, there will be a slight lean towards red. Like if you look at the road here, if I move my reds back, it will be somewhat of a blue tone. If I move it to red, it will have a slight reddish tone. And if I increase my green bias, it will inject sort of very subtle green into the shadows. And same goes for the blue as well. You can increase it to inject a little bit of blues in this shadows area. So to use the tone lights, you must balance it with the image adjustments controls down here. That's why this is present. And the last section that you can find is the tone light fall off. The tone light fall off mimics the way that the light is dimmer in the edges of the filter and stronger in the middle. In reality, it's the vignette mask that determines the mapping of the effect. So it's exactly that. You can turn on the preview fall off mask and see how much this vignette is affecting. So if I reduce the softness a bit, and increase the amount, you will see it more clearly. And if I turn it on and off, you will notice that if it's sort of creating a vignette right around the frame. This is something to mimic the organic vignette that you get from a diffusion filter. So that's more or less all the settings in the ColorTone diffuser. And now going back to the top, we have a 3D LUT compatible checkbox which removes everything that uses secondary tools, such as the tone light fall off that we saw just now, which is sort of like a vignette. So it's more or less a secondary tool. If I turn this checkbox on, you'll notice that it removes that effect. And the diffusion effect is removed as well. Alright, now that we've gone through all the different settings, let's jump into the presets. I feel that the presets here are pretty nice, just that in some cases, there are some sort of clipping or compressing that I don't really like, such as in the clean slate. In the default setting itself, there will be a compression in the highlights. If you don't believe me, you can apply it onto this grayscale ramp. If I go to clean slate, you will see that this compression is happening in the highlight. So if I turn off my adjustment, it will be removed. So if you're going to be using a preset for this, then I guess you will just use the full preset itself. But the good side of that is if you want to make any adjustments to the preset, you can do it as well, such as if I switch it to subtle and I want to make changes to the diffusion, I will have the option to do that. And this preset is a very helpful way that you can get a lot of different looks because subtle, low contrast, and strong start. So this is somewhat of a burnt film look. So the shadows are super crushed, but then there's this cutoff point in my shadow soft clip, I believe. And we also have a teal soft, which adds a bit of teal. So you can see that the green bias is pushed all the way up. And we also have teal high contrast, which doesn't really work on this frame. But if it's too dark, you can adjust the exposure by raising it up somewhat like this. Or you can also go for the other comfy couch. And let's cycle through the rest, such as Dino Crunch. And we also have a warm diner. So some of these looks might not look good on this clip. So let's try to apply it on another clip. So this is Clean Slate Subtle, which raises up the shadows to create this. It's sort of a very nice filmic look on itself. Definitely not something that you can use on every project, but it's a look on itself, which is very helpful. So let's go for Teal Soft. And you can almost say that this is a totally a film look on itself. Let's also try the Warm Diner. And this preset injects a little bit of a purplish or magenta tone in the shadows, and then it raises up the highlight, which is a very nice filmic effect. Not necessarily the most cinematic one, but then it's a look, like I said. But at the end of the day, if you only want the diffusion effect coming from this color tone diffuser, you can turn off the other effects, such as in the clean slate, I'm going to turn off my enable adjustments, and I get a totally clean image. So I'm just going to go into the diffusion, turn it on, and increase the amount. Then I just get the diffusion on this whole node. So it's not necessary for you to use everything within this node, just use whatever you need, which I think this diffusion effect is pretty neat. I think it's very cool for DaVinci Resolve to include this in its studio version because there's a demand for it. So that's it for this video. I hope you learned something new. If you did, please drop a like and subscribe to watch more. I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.